Muted bursts of blaster fire drown out the sound of birds on the forest moon of Endor. Deep thuds shaking the vegetation, a sign the metal walkers of the Galactic Empire are closing in. Beneath these trees it will all come to an end. We lie prone in the dirt, me and my squad mate reflecting on all we have achieved, and then push those thoughts as far away as we can when we get up and charge into battle. I'm 11 years old on this hot summer day. A video game is not supposed to be the highlight of the evening, but it became just that. Today we are having a straatfeest, a street party, a yearly occurrence where the entire street gets together for all kinds of activities and dinner afterwards. It's already been a long day. Me and my friend participated in the painting of wooden shields, the theme is the Roman Empire, raced around in wheelbarrows, had a taste of some delicious cake from the organized bake-off, and did a dozen other things that escape my memory. Now though, it's 5 PM. All the parents are going home to cook, leaving us some time to kill until dinner. The outside is a dry, sunny 30 degrees Celsius still, a real treat in the Netherlands, but we decide to go over to my house anyways. Here in my room with the curtains closed, sitting on 2 cushions in front of a PlayStation 2 and a dusty second-hand CRT TV, we will play what we've always played. The greatest source of joy and excitement in our lives. Star Wars Battlefront. For years, almost every day I'd spent fighting out the virtual battles of the Star Wars universe and chewing bubblegum at the same time. A practice that became so habitual that even when I smell bubblegum today, it can only make me think of that game. I loved this game, despite the fact even that I barely knew English and I hadn't seen any of the Star Wars movies yet. Yes, all my fundamental knowledge of Star Wars came from Battlefront. It's there where the planet, character and vehicle names were etched into my memory like the ones and zeros in the game disc itself. It's not hard to grasp why I became enamored with this game, for it was my first taste of an immersive all-out war shooter. And how immersive it was, anxiously awaiting the coastal assault on Kashyyyk docks, crawling through the temple ruins on Yavin 4 while multiple ATSTs fired down on my team, the sound of battle all around me. Simply walking up to a spaceship to enter it, take off, land on a remote rock and snipe enemies from a distance. And better, doing it all together with a friend through local split screen. It's 5:40 PM now and we're starting to get excited. We created an instant action playlist with the toughest battles and so far we haven't lost a single one. That hasn't happened before, we've always lost at least one. And so we become more determined. We're boots on the ground in Cloud City and it's looking bad, real bad. Our reinforcements are about half the enemy team already and we keep dying from grenades and enemies turning up behind us. Usually this kind of scoreboard means defeat already, but in our desperation, we suddenly find something. Strategy. For the first time we really take note of the level design. A large square in the middle with a walkway and a bunch of command posts circling it. Crucially, there's a command post, respawn point for the uninitiated, right in the middle of the square as well. Our strategy shifts. We stop mindlessly running around blasting and team up to start clearing the walkway. There's not much space between the walls and railings, allies and enemies, blaster bolts and grenades. And so our strategy turns into a bloodbath, one long choke point spanning the entire map. A choke point both teams are committed to push through. But we push harder. Slowly we progress, one step at a time. We make sure the points behind us remain occupied and when one of us dies, the other holds position until we're together again. Bodies litter the hallway now and the pile keeps growing with every barrage of bolts and thermal detonators we send down range. There's no time nor resource to spare. By the time we clear the last tunnel and step back into the cool evening sun after capturing the final command post, we're outnumbered 3-1. Defeat is imminent. But not today, because our strategy paid off. Our adversaries may outnumber us, but we have the high ground. There's only one spawn point for the entire enemy team and it's down below in the center. They stand absolutely no chance as our entire team fires down on them from every direction. A two-sided bloodbath in the tunnels becomes a one-sided massacre on the streets. Our reinforcements slowly balance out and tip in our favor at the last possible moment. When I get the final kill, a single-digit amount of us are left standing. Victory! Me and my friend both jump up from excitement and exchange looks. We know what's ahead. The final battle of our playlist, the Battle of Endor. Even when playing Battlefront alone, I'd constantly have all kinds of stories playing in my head. I'd roleplay all kinds of heroic soldiers, imagine all kinds of scenarios. And yes, it's my childlike imagination, but it's also the game. Battlefront put no limitations on you. You could place landmines on a snowspeeder for a kamikaze run, or steal a TIE fighter from an enemy base. A lot of core Star Wars fantasies were built into the game as well. Yes, you could get eaten by a Sarlacc pit. Yes, you could visit the cantina in Mos Eisley. Battlefront 1 was endless fun, but of course, it didn't stop there. Eventually I got Battlefront 2 and played that for a whole lot as well, though I did enjoy it a bit less than the first one for reasons I wasn't able to put into words at the time, but just felt. Like the slightly worse graphics, less immersive classes and slightly less sandboxy design. It did have the legendary space battles though, and the ability to place Jedi and Sith, which I both took endless enjoyment from. Naturally at this point I was ready for a Star Wars Battlefront 3, but silence is what I got instead. Years started to pile up since the early days, and as I progressed from PlayStation 2 to PlayStation 3, from CRT to flat screen, from flip phone to smartphone, the hope for a next installment seemed ever more desperate by the year. And yet, hope there was. Leaks and rumors found themselves trickling onto the internet. Too many puddles on the floor of video game discussion to be ignored. Every leak made this Battlefront 3 seem better than the last. I thought space battles were awesome, but in leaks we saw ground to space battles, the literal ability to go from being in a city on foot to flying up to a capital ship and board it. And that seemed only the beginning of Free Radical's ambition.
Which leads to a clearing with some hidden starfighters. And I think this section here is the most impressive part of the game. You jump into an X-Wing and fly up, slowly realizing that the Death Star 2 takes up the entire sky. And you can actually fly inside it.
Yes, by the way, that's not a mod or anything, that's a real leak. So naturally, whether I was awake or asleep, I dream about this game that would surely be announced any moment now. Eventually, this gameplay leaked, which I thought was Battlefront 3, but was really a prototype Star Wars First Assault, a shooter that would be cancelled. I remember looking at this gameplay though and just instantly recognizing how fun it looked. It looked fun! This type of game is just a no-brainer. There was no way to mess it up. Surely, game companies understood how easy this money was going to be. Battlefront 3 is cancelled. So the news broke a couple months later. After all the waiting for this game, its existence being confirmed and denied in the same breath nearly drove me insane. Then Disney swooped in, bought Star Wars and gave the exclusive rights to make games with it to EA of all companies. The dream was dead. I didn't dare hope, not anymore. Somehow Battlefront returned. E3 2013, the snow in this teaser trailer is this. Could this be? Moments later, my dream came true. Forget old cancelled Battlefront 3, DICE would be making this new one instead, and I was so excited. If any studio should be tackling this franchise, it's DICE, the folks behind Battlefield, the modern military all-out war shooter that Battlefront was even originally just a fancy Star Wars knockoff of. No return of a franchise could be more important to me than Battlefront. My excitement peaked, and then, which came as a total shock to me, nosedived. With every detail revealed, darkness crept into my heart. This Battlefront would be a reboot, not a direct continuation of the groundwork laid by the previous games and cancelled sequel. No ground to space battles, no space battles at all actually. Worse, where the original Battlefronts featured basically all iconic battles across the entire Star Wars franchise up to that point, new Battlefront would feature just 3 from the original trilogy? Hoth, Tatooine and Endor, 2 barren wasteland planets, 1 forest. Yes, I know, the presentation of this Battlefront to this day is mind-blowing. The game looks and sounds so good, I don't have the words in my vocabulary to describe it. But man did it suck, knowing this game's gameplay ambition wasn't going to exceed a game made in 2005. Worse, slowly the tragic realization set in that this game was less gameplay ambitious than the 2005 one by a long shot. Remember swapping weapons? No, you get 1 gun now. Remember earning the ability to play as a Jedi through playing well? It's a little collectible power-up coin now. Remember entering vehicles that spawned over the map and encouraged tactical objective play? They're a power-up coin as well now. Oh, and entering one vehicle with multiple players? Doesn't exist anymore. Ammo and health droids? Gone. Grenades? They're a cooldown ability now. Split screen? Severely limited. Capturing command posts? We took that out. Galactic Conquest? We took that out. Classes encouraging teamwork? We took that out. Sandbox elements that allow any creativity at all? We took that out. The game mode Conquest, the only game mode that existed in all Battlefront, the game mode that this entire franchise is built upon, the game mode DICE itself invented and popularized with Battlefield. Is it in the game? No, we took that out as well. When I finally got hands on Battlefront 2015, the first thing I do is open a bot wave defense on Endor. I set foot on this photorealistic forest and I'm in absolute shock. I feel nothing. Zero. No immersion, no wonder, just complete apathy. It ends up taking 5 minutes for me to do feel something. A drop pod.
We've sent a drop pod for you.
Crushing my body at terminal velocity.
Scanners are picking up on the location of the first pod. Let's get to it and get to it quickly.
I chuckled then, but I cry now, knowing that moment 5 minutes into playing is my highlight of Battlefront 2015. I've rarely become bored with a AAA game within seconds, but it happened here. It sounds ridiculous, but I'm not kidding. I instantly recognized this game for being the nostalgia bait and switch that it is. Did I play more of this game? I did. Dozen hours maybe. But I was hate playing, loathing every second, stringing together long rants in my head that would take 10 years to be put to paper, microphone and screen. My disappointment with Star Wars Battlefront 2015 cannot be understated. We all know what happened next. Yes, there were players who loved it for what it was and ended up creating childhood memories of their own, and that's fine, but you cannot deny the sheer level of player drop-off after launch. Just like me, most players shot 5 lasers on Endor and called it quits after that, because just like me, most players felt an overwhelming sense of, honestly, boredom after the spectacle of the incredible graphics wore off. EA's Battlefront 1 was simply not engaging over longer periods of time to most players. Eventually Battlefront 2 gets announced, which initially gets me hopeful. I truly hoped EA would take the criticism to heart, but unfortunately Battlefront 2017 is just 2015 expanded, releasing mostly unfinished instead of completely unfinished. And now attached is a loot box system so predatory it resulted in a legendary gamer revolt that single-handedly turned the tide against the practice and ran Battlefront's name through the mud in the process. People complain about battle passes now, and I don't discourage it, but let us never forget what our present would have looked like if we hadn't fought against actual money-fueled, pay-to-win gambling in our video games. Seriously, it would have been bad. Slowly we're catching up to today now, and the reason why I'm making this video. I'm making this video because the loot box narrative has kind of overshadowed all. People love redemption stories, they love silver linings. The story goes that after the loot boxes were removed, Battlefront 2 actually became a great game. A great game simply held back by the catastrophic reputational damage EA did to it. If only they had kept updating it, if only they hadn't tried to add the loot boxes in the first place, Battlefront 2 would be a thriving masterpiece. I'm here today to fight that narrative. To be the contrarian and say no. Simply no. Battlefront 2 is not nearly the game it should be. Accepting it in its current state is doing a disservice to us all. Through 20 years of expectations slowly being eroded, some of you may have forgotten what an actually ambitious game looks like, what the name Battlefront stands for, but I have not, and I will not allow this name to be tarnished any longer. Today I will in great detail not just lay out every way in which modern Battlefront fails to deliver on its promise, but bestow upon you my own vision for this franchise as well. Because I believe the failure of modern Battlefront is entirely a design and philosophy issue, nothing more, nothing less. DICE has an awful vision, and it starts with their answer to the crucial question. What is Star Wars Battlefront? Why does it exist? What is its goal? Well, it's right on the box of the original game. Live the battles, it says. It doesn't say combat evolved, it doesn't say become a hero. No, live the battles is an all-encompassing promise to the player. A promise that this disc will transport you to immersive battles in a galaxy far, far away. Oh, and if you think it's unfair for me to scrutinize DICE on 2004's vision, how about their own? Immerse yourself in your Star Wars battle fantasies, the back of 2015's box says. Simultaneously a lot more precise and a lot less poetic than the simple live the battles, but I digress, they're saying the same thing. Immersion. That's the fundamental pillar not just Battlefront, but Star Wars as a whole is built on. It's about getting lost, living in that universe. How do you make a game immersive? Well, the path is not straightforward. Immersion is a tricky goal to chase because it requires players to suspend their own disbelief. They must willingly pretend to play a role in their own movie. Players are all different and get immersed for different reasons. The only thing you can do as a developer is give players as many handholds to reach for as possible so they will hopefully immerse themselves. In practice, this might mean that instead of clicking on a door, teleporting inside and then having nothing to do, you might be able to walk through a door dynamically, walk up to a bartender and order a drink, then drink it. This is how Witcher 3 operates. But notice how there are levels to these handholds. I achieve the fantasy of stopping for a drink with an item 2D pictogram in my inventory. The game doesn't actually have to fully animate the bartender preparing a drink, me grabbing it and drinking one swig at a time. Games don't fulfill fantasy by literally simulating and animating every little bit about their worlds. They fulfill fantasy by allowing you to interact with the world in all the basic ways you could ask for and allowing your mind to fill in the rest. Old Battlefront understood that link between interaction and immersion. Is the ability to go prone really necessary for any common gameplay scenario? No. But if you want to live at your sniper fantasy or soldier pinned down during a brutal assault fantasy, this ability was an immersion handhold. Does it make sense for blasters to be reloaded, have limited ammo, and for you to have a secondary pistol? Not really in the Star Wars universe, but if you want to live out the fantasy of teamwork, having to fire one at a time so enemies can't advance, supplying teammates with resources when they run low, or simply pulling out a sidearm for a cinematic last stand, that's an immersion handhold. The ability to hijack enemy vehicles allowed you to live out the fantasy of stealth infiltration behind enemy lines and turning their machinery against them. The ability to land in an enemy capital ship during space battles allowed you to live out the fantasy of destroying their operation from within. There are so many examples of design that came into existence presumably just because a developer thought it would be cool. And that's all that was needed back then. Battlefront didn't become a sandbox by accident, it followed from the goal of immersion. This is how games used to be made. The goal was immersion, the solution was interactivity, the result was depth. You could make choices now. Go prone over here, flank that objective, take that vehicle, disable that turret. Sure, old Battlefront hasn't aged well, these games are dead simple by today's standards, but mindless they still are not and you're still able to live out some simple battle fantasies. The reason why I so passionately criticize DICE's take on Battlefront is not because they attempted to let us live out our fantasies and failed. It's because they never even intended for us to experience our fantasies in the first place. They didn't make gameplay depth follow naturally from interactivity, and interactivity follow naturally from having immersion as their North Star. They started with the gameplay top-down and made a game purposefully devoid of interactivity. Now why would you do such a thing? We'll get to that, but the result cannot be denied. To start with, everything wrong with DICE's vision is summed up by their vehicle design. They turned them into power-ups that you unlock with points and then instantly spawn in when selected from a menu screen. A menu screen you access by dying, which is a whole problem in itself, but whatever. Everything that makes vehicles interesting, besides them having more health and doing more damage, has been removed. You can't enter them naturally, pilot them together with a friend, or use them as a transport. You can't fix them up with a blowtorch as part of a pilot class. You can't hijack them from the enemy team. You can't place explosives on them to use them as an improvised bomb. And when you stop using one, it conveniently self-destructs so no one else can take it either. Think about the destructive effect on depth this change alone has. The choices you are now robbed of making. When deciding to take one objective or another, control over specific spawning vehicles is no longer a consideration you have to take into account. When deciding to play one class or another, the usefulness to your own team's vehicles or destructive potential to the enemy's team's vehicles no longer plays a role. You can't choose to get 6 guys together in a dropship and drop them off together in the epic assault of a command post as a last-ditch effort to turn the tide of battle. You can't choose to creatively barricade a street with a tank and use it as cover. Vehicles don't stimulate tactical positioning besides scaring enemy players into alleys, and don't stimulate tactical thinking besides giving the enemy players a binary choice to shoot them or not. And the vehicles are just the beginning. The exact same reductive design decisions plague the entire game, down to the boots on the ground gameplay. Grenades are a cooldown ability, secondary weapons are a cooldown ability, equipment is a cooldown ability. You're 100% self-sufficient, everything regenerates, robbing you from choices motivated by restocking, seeking out teammates with supplies, diverting to a command post to restock there, playing as a class with bonus supplies yourself. And on classes, class play is core to Battlefront's identity, just like it is to Battlefield. The old games designed them for team play, the exact thing you'd expect. Support, anti-armor, infantry, sniper. But DICE had to break the mold yet again. Of their 4 default classes, just one of them has a team-focused ability. Really, you'll just choose them based only on how many kills and points you think you'll be able to get with them. The slower guy who does more damage, or the faster guy who does less damage. This is Star Wars though, and as we all know, variants are an important part of each faction. It's not just battle droids with different rifles, it's the super battle droid with more armor, a wrist cannon, rocket launcher and jetpack. The droidica with rapid fire cannons and an overshield making them invincible. Wait, don't both sound a bit OP? Well yes, Star Wars does have a certain power scaling in its armies. A super battle droid is supposed to be better than a normal battle droid. But we can't have that in a video game or everyone would just choose to play as the super battle droid. Old Battlefront tried to balance this all out a little through conventional means, but I don't think they succeeded. Which, to be fair, wasn't exactly necessary because the game was built to be played with and against bots. There would always be equal spread of the classes because of that. You cannot count on that happening in modern multiplayer games, so the issue of power scaling and balance was real and unsolved. So how did DICE solve this problem? Well, by not solving the problem and turning classes into power-ups as well. Vehicles and soldier variants, they're the same thing now. The result is that you cannot reliably, tactically choose a special class for the situation you're in because DICE limited the amount of any class that can be active in the world at the same time and only allows you to buy one-time use of these classes with points you get from killing enemies and playing objective. This prevents the game from turning into the droidica fiesta it could have been, sure, but doesn't solve the fact that these classes are OP and getting killed by them feels unfair, because it literally is. A jet trooper has more health, more agility, does more damage and has an instant kill rocket launcher on cooldown, which is all balanced against nothing. Modern Star Wars Battlefront is not a war zone, it's farmland. Play as the default classes and your purpose is being farmed by those with the cool vehicles, the cool classes and the Jedi and the Sith. Your goal playing as a default class is to gather points together so you can temporarily become a more powerful character yourself and earn some cheap kills of your own. Becoming literally stronger than other players around you is what DICE bet on would make for an addictive gameplay loop. And they kept going crazier, one idea leading to the next. They just couldn't help themselves, ending with the most offensively toxic idea. What if the very act of playing the game longer than someone else would make you stronger than them? Introducing Star Cards. Every playable class, hero and vehicle in the game has an individual leveling system and 3 card slots to customize. Play more as a certain unit and you'll get to unlock new cards and upgrade existing ones. What kind of cards? Resourceful. All of your abilities have shorter recharge times. Bounty Hunter. You gain battle points at an increased rate. Feeling sick yet? Look at my maxed out aerial class. Survivalist. Health regenerates faster. Battle Hardened. Maximum health is increased. Aerial Training. Gain a small amount of health for each defeated enemy. Not just am I already a more powerful, tanky and agile class, I'm now walking around with 20% more health, 100 extra recharge rate and an extra 50 health on every kill. The more you play a class, the stronger you get in the most tangible of ways. Also in terms of weapons, because you can unlock literally stronger weapons with stronger attachments. Progression systems are nothing new to multiplayer games, but I personally consider the difference between unlocking a different weapon and a better weapon and more health and stronger abilities to be very significant. Also don't forget, the original idea was that you'd be able to unlock these cards and upgrades through paid loot boxes. This system is and was always intended to be pay to win, just now you pay with time instead of money. And aren't we forgetting something? Remember when I was talking about immersion, live the battles and sandbox? Why, when playing this Battlefront 2, am I even thinking of points, leveling, cards, equipment, recharge percentages, character builds and skins, instead of just living the battle? It's here where slowly DICE's real intentions are starting to emerge. They lied, maybe even to themselves, that the goal of their game is immersion. It really isn't. Obviously it isn't. Like a fresh paint job on a rusty old car, presentation can hide the flaws of the internal machinery to the onlooker, but not to the driver. Watch gameplay of Battlefront with the UI turned off and I'll grant you, it looks like the most immersive game ever made. But play it, engage with its systems, and the game will reveal to you its true intentions. I can't see it any other way. DICE made their version of Battlefront with the depressing goal of removing as much depth as possible from the moment-to-moment gameplay loop, dismantling cooperation and team play, getting rid of player-driven creativity, destroying the sandbox by pouring a layer of concrete all over it. Why? So each individual player can feel like a hero instead. It's not much of a stretch. The Battlefront games were made and released at peak Overwatch. Hero shooters were the hype. Are hero shooters about team play? Of course, but they're not called co-op shooters for a reason. In hero shooters, each player feels like the protagonist through their choice of standout character, skin for that character, and their unique ability. Everyone gets their moment to shine. Battlefront shouldn't be about heroes, it should be about soldiers. The fantasy of being part of something greater than yourself is what these large-scale multiplayer shooters are about. It's about being special because you're not special. It's about looking at the players next to you and understanding you're both in this together. The result of DICE's design is a game where you don't think about your environment, your mission, your technical options, what's best for the team, what's best for your squad. It's just about points, cards, and getting to be a Jedi at the end of it all. Your teammates don't even register as human to you. You don't interact with them because DICE made sure you can't interact with them. The only thing that happens in DICE's Star Wars is getting kills and getting killed. Every player for themselves, all chasing the red on their radar. Live the battles, even by DICE's own admission, is no longer the tagline of the franchise. 2017's back cover says it plainly. Heroes are born on the battlefront. Skill gap compression is a term I first heard in a B-Dobbins FTW video. I admire the guy, he obviously inspired my YouTube journey. But I digress. I love that term, right? Skill gap compression. The idea that a game purposefully adds a bunch of randomness, chaos and unbalance, so kills are easier to get by more players. Participation trophies essentially. We don't want you to feel bad for being a bad player, so every once in a while we'll give you some cheap kills to keep you engaged. But DICE didn't even consider that enough to keep casual players from quitting, so now when the scoreboard rolls around at the end of a deathmatch, deaths aren't even displayed. When you get an assist, it still says defeated first and foremost. When you kill a bot, the message on screen is literally player killed. It's ridiculous and gets more ridiculous. DICE is so desperate for you to never feel bad that they literally give you points for dying, labeled a sacrifice. Kill a player, you get 100 points. Die, you get 100 points. I'm serious. All you have to do is exist in this game and sooner or later you'll get to be the thing that does more damage and takes less damage, ensuring an unbalanced playing field where the average gap between bad and great is severely diminished. The only way which a game so purposefully simplistic and avoid becoming an arcadey, mechanically focused run-and-gunning gameplay is through map design. Having such cool and interesting maps that you can't help but strategize. Maybe if I run up those stairs I can take sniper position over there and support teammates who are pushing that objective. No. Almost every map in Battlefront 2 is 90% flat. Flat with some objects thrown about that act as cover. Verticality is the coolest and most fun thing in map design. It makes such a difference to your level of mental activation when there's opportunity to take a vantage point that allows you to watch over a street, or when there's opportunity to vertically flank enemies. When you can hide on a roof while a platoon of enemy combatants runs past. Battlefront is a game that can even more uniquely benefit from verticality because, do I need to point it out, it's a game with jetpacks. Instead of the map stimulating fantasy and creating unique opportunities, they feed into the chaos just as much as every other thing DICE implemented. They're small, so you'll often face multiple enemies at a time. They're open, so you'll often face multiple enemies at a time. And they're flat, so you'll often face multiple enemies at a time. Battlefront is now a fast-paced chaos simulator with grenade spam and groups of players firing into each other around every corner. Compare that to Battlefield 4. BF4 has a higher player count than Battlefront, but the maps are larger, more expansive, more fights are between two soldiers, and you'll spend a lot more time traveling the map and seeking out enemies, coming up with strategies, teaming up with squad mates, being immersed. That is, on most maps. There is an exception. Operation Locker, 32v32 in a single compact bunker. No vehicles, just hallway after hallway and door after door. This map is very popular in the game, because it is chaotic. You get into these crazy standoffs, 15 soldiers on both sides of a door, both spamming grenades and firing in the general direction of the enemy, medics reviving player after player. Even if you suck at Battlefield normally, you will get kills on this map, and you know what? That's great, chaos is undeniably fun. And even immersive in its own right, through sheer spectacle. It's the game firing on all cylinders. I would not want a Battlefield, or Battlefront for that matter, without an Operation Locker style experience. But now imagine every map is Operation Locker. Every match is chaos, every match is dying to random BS and getting kills through random BS. The fun will wear off and you'll yearn for something more meaningful. That's DICE's Battlefront. Maps may not always be enclosed bunkers, but they're designed to funnel groups of players into each other in the exact same way. Now put those overpowered classes, vehicles and god forbid lightsabers back in, and the chaos becomes a constant, the norm instead of the exception. And now I brought up lightsabers, I get it, in old Battlefront 2 you had the ability to play actual heroes and villains from the Star Wars universe, and it's a beloved feature. But I honestly kind of disagreed with its inclusion back then, and I still kinda do now. I mean, I have to. A few minutes back I held a whole rant about Battlefront being about soldiers, not heroes. Battlefront, the original game, was made to simulate wars in the Star Wars universe. We already have plenty of games about the Jedi and the Sith. This game is supposed to tell the stories of the background characters, that's the point. It's supposed to be the Rogue One of Star Wars video games. Instead, I now have a bunch of overpowered classes and a constant number of 4 purposefully overpowered, one-shotting left and right lightsaber users sprinting around the battlefront and wreaking havoc. Every 30 seconds you run into some hero on either your or the enemy's team. It's not immersive, it contradicts the point of Battlefront and is overall so silly when you think about it. A game of 40-player lobbies where the fun of 4 players demands sacrificing the fun of the other 36. That's unacceptable. Think about it for more than a minute and you have to get to the conclusion that this is no place in any self-respecting multiplayer game. And yet it's in both DICE's Battlefronts. Because you might just agree to being frustrated if you can later push this frustration on other people. Just keep running around, shooting into choke points and getting farmed so you can do some farming of your own later. You're not supposed to think, you're not supposed to fail, you're not supposed to feel anything but joy when your time to farm comes. But what hollow joy it is when you realize the game is running a literal charity campaign for your skill issue. DICE believes in order to keep a broad audience engaged, they must dumb everything down, make the game as simple as possible, give everyone a turn to feel special. For the game cannot have depth, lest it push away the broad audience. They are deeply mistaken. And yet to my horror, even in the face of a dead franchise, people defend this idea. I just want a casual game to wind down after work, I hear them argue. Not every game is supposed to be sweaty and competitive. This is a false dichotomy. Games don't either fall into deep and competitive or shallow and casual, but I can understand how people see it that way when they think getting kills is the only way to have fun in a game and the game reinforces that idea. That right there is what it all comes down to. Making this video forced me to really think about where at the deepest core level I disagree with DICE's vision. I think I've reached a conclusion. DICE obviously wants to aim Battlefront at a broad, casual audience. Remember, their games came out together with the first new Star Wars movies. They wanted people who maybe haven't touched video games in a long time to look at Battlefront's graphics and be like, I want to play that. They intended to make a casual game first and foremost. This is all fine with me, Battlefront has always been a casual game. It's just that DICE has this very restrictive idea of what casual means. Their core vision problem stems from 2 truths I suspect they believe in. Truth 1. Casual players do not want to think. That's why we remove complexity in Sandbox. We don't want them to have to deal with choosing which objective to take, choosing which class will best help your teammates, developing strategy for taking out that annoying ATST. This game should be about dropping in and running around and shooting lasers at moving stuff. That's it. We'll sacrifice gameplay immersion and throw a crapload of money at audio-visual immersion to hide that fact. Even though DICE should have known the immersive fact of graphics will wear off quickly. Truth 2. Casual players just want to have fun. And uh-oh, that's suddenly really hard now. We've accidentally made the game hyper-competitive because by removing sandbox depth, we've suddenly put focus on mechanical depth. Now instead of the outcome of fights changing based on creativity and tactics, it's become about whoever has better aim and can avoid enemy fire better. Battlefront is now a sweaty game of players jumping, slide cancelling and headshotting for any advantage. A parent playing Battlefront in the little free time they have would now be stomped on by sweaty no-lifers and quit, leaving DICE only one option. Trying to compensate for all the stuff I've talked about, giving points for dying, adding overpowered characters into the mix that everyone gets a chance at playing for a bit, designing maps and modes for chaotic standoffs that both look impressive and result in random kills on both teams. hero shooter design where it becomes more about unique abilities and standing out than being part of a uniform faction. Doesn't this kind of all make sense? Well, it would if Truth 1 were truth, but it isn't. Casual players don't just like to think, they love to think. The three most popular games right now, Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft, all with an impossibly broad audience. I can't speak much for Roblox, but Fortnite and Minecraft, are they mindless? Are they shallow? Do kids enjoy them because they don't have to think? Or do they enjoy them because the games stimulate them to think? Because the choices they make in those games have bigger impact than in any other. Default Fortnite explodes in popularity summer 2017. There was no bigger thrill to find in that time than being stuck in a house with the storm closing in and having to strategize how to cross the street without the sniper in the opposing building putting a hole through your skull. Kids play Fortnite, Roblox and Minecraft because it allows them to be creative, because they have depth. Battle Royales became huge because every decision mattered so much. And ironically, having an expensive sandbox is its own form of skill gap compression, but a fun one. Players will have all kinds of random advantages over each other. They'll run into each other with different weapons, on different levels of elevation, with different equipment. One player is unlucky and dies to a droidica because his sticky grenades are useless on them. One player is lucky and destroys an AAT because he has sticky grenades. Items and weapons aren't stronger as a base trait, they're different and give players advantage and disadvantage based on situation. Yes, DICE is right, casual players just want to have fun, but designing a game for fun takes on a whole other meaning when you don't first gut it of creative complexity, making getting more and more kills the only metric of fun that matters. Fun can mean luring a single enemy into a landmine. It can mean being prone on the ground while an enemy hover tank flies right over you. Fun can mean racing through the map with speeder bikes. Fun can mean distracting an AT-AT while a friend runs up to it to blow up one of its legs. 5 seconds later, an enemy pilot has fun repairing the leg while his teammates form a circle around him and fend off any rebels. In modern Battlefront, I don't have fun stories for you. The game is arcadey. Your 1 gun and 3 power-ups being your only way to interact with the game ensures that finding players to use your 1 gun and 3 power-ups on is naturally the only thing you'll think about. The most interesting thing that'll happen to you is getting a bunch of kills that one time. But in Battlefield 4, I can tell you about that one time me and a friend of mine drove all the way to the opposite side of rogue transmission on an ATV. Far behind enemy lines, as a taunt almost, we together start capturing the objective right in front of their home base. Suddenly, a goddamn enemy tank rolls past. We flip out over the mic but freeze in the game. Did the tank notice us? Does he notice we're capturing the objective? The tank's engine goes quiet. And then comes alive with a deafening roar. It drives past again, firing around, presumably at the place it thinks we're hiding. We're screwed and we know it. I immediately mark the tank in vain hope an allied A-10 Warthog notices our situation on the ground and redirects its flight path to send a barrage of armor-piercing rounds raining down like the hammer of God. The call would go unanswered. My friend floors it and in a panic sends our only possible escape vehicle into a compound, getting us stuck. I barely caught a glimpse of the tank as we accelerated forwards and my heart made such a jump, actual adrenaline is pumping through me now. Entering the compound is our only option. But I set one foot inside and the wall explodes violently right in front of me. I dive to the ground, boom, another shell lands above me. A rain of shrapnel follows. With milliseconds to decide life or death, we make the worst possible decision and try to get back on the ATV. We're stuck. A deafening explosion behind me and I know without looking, my friend is dead. His body must have protected me from the explosion though, because I'm still here. Shaking and trembling, I push myself off the ATV and make a run for the hills where I... See what I mean? Even over this short time span, I experienced so many dynamic moments, an actual adrenaline rush, and a story me and this friend would talk about for weeks to come. I had fun, I felt alive, I lived the battle, and all without firing a single shot. I know I've been talking a lot of trash, but modern Battlefront is not a bad game. There are players who've put hundreds of hours into them, players who enjoyed grinding for gear, enjoyed perfecting and experimenting with builds, enjoyed the fast-paced gun battles, chaotic standoffs, and every once in a while the experience of wrecking enemies with their use of heroes. I don't intend to invalidate their experience with this video by pretending the game is simple, shallow, mindless and nothing more. There are players who took what depth modern Battlefront does have and ran with it, squeezing every drop of fun out of it. What I simply want you to understand is how depressed I get from this game being celebrated now as the definitive Star Wars experience, as EA finally making good on their promise. Here we are, stuck with a product that doesn't even concern itself with matching the ambition of a PlayStation 2 game, a product that uses the name and legacy of the PlayStation 2 game to legitimize itself, only to be a Trojan horse for a completely different game with just the slightest, most forced nods to the old one. And now I'm supposed to be happy because they added droidicas and Anakin Skywalker in some update, or finally added a mode where you can go from ground combat to entering an enemy's capital ship in a cutscene. I'm supposed to be happy because there's a lot of content now. Never mind how much of it is actually worthy of the Battlefront name. I do not in any way belittle the people who enjoyed and continue to enjoy the modern games. In fact, during the making of this video, I watched some video essays from players who did have a great time, and I had a great time hearing them passionately talk about the aspects they like. The aspects they were able to go so much more in depth on than I ever could because I simply haven't played the games much. No, I'm not saying the modern games are bad, I'm saying they clearly do not appeal to the vast majority of players DICE targeted. An honest, modern interpretation of Battlefront would have. But these games are not Battlefront, and I would very much appreciate if that fact didn't get lost on people. If we say we want space battles, and we mean ship-to-ship infiltration, dynamically taking off with starfighters and destroying critical infrastructure on an enemy cruiser, we shouldn't let DICE off the hook for just making a battle in space. If we say we want conquest, we shouldn't let DICE off the hook for making kind of conquest. Everyone is so eager to forgive this studio, and I get it, the production value is insane and we all yearn for closure. The problem is, lower your expectations in this industry and you'll just get worse next time. I want to accept and forgive, but anytime I get close, I just look at my PlayStation 2 copy of Pandemic Stars Battlefront 2 and I think, why? Why should we, the players, be the ones lowering our standards? We were not the ones to set those standards in the first place, and companies like EA are perfectly capable of meeting them. Which brings me to this. What would an actual, honest, modern, ambitious interpretation look like? Well, I'll tell you. I'm taking control of the Battlefront name and will present to you the game you've always wanted, but didn't dare dream about. In my Battlefront, sandbox, creativity, immersion and fantasy all combine into the most epic battles you've ever seen. And it starts with heroes and villains. I'm not going to remove them from the game, maybe to your surprise. Yes, I believe in Battlefront being about soldiers. But a Star Wars sandbox without lightsabers? Come on! Here's how I'd implement them. Titanfall has this fun idea where, when your team loses any type of game mode, a transport ship will come to pick you up to allow you to escape. It's sudden death, no respawns. The loser's goal is to get to the transport ship in time without dying. The winner's goal is to mow down everyone trying to escape and destroy the transport ship before it can take off. My Battlefront 3 will have the exact same thing, but one difference. This moment, and this moment only, a chilling voice line will play over comms. Darth Vader has entered the battlefield. Your radar will jam and respawns will cease. Vader is the hunter, you are the prey. Notice how in this case all sides are living a fantasy. The lucky Vader player gets to be an invincible god, the winning team gets to chase off the rebels side by side with the Sith Lord, the losing team gets to live out a desperate last stand while they retreat from the inevitable. Imagine how intense this could get, a buddy of you staying behind to buy you time, or you trying to use an underground tunnel when you suddenly hear heavy breathing and notice the faint red glow of a saber. The game stops being about losing or winning and starts becoming about surviving. Dying wouldn't feel annoying and unfair, it'd feel epic. This all does mean only one player will get to play as a hero in an entire match. To satisfy players wishing for more hero action, there will be separate game modes specifically for hero versus villain gameplay. Heroes are back to having that crazy mobility they had back in the day, which is where players end up discovering a lot of mechanical depth. The core mode of Battlefront 3 though will be Conquest, classic Conquest, with 64 players instead of 40 now. I know DICE must have a reason for going with 40 instead of 64 like they did with Battlefield, and I'm sympathetic to it if this reason is technical, but as a creative choice I feel like 64 hits that sweet spot where a bunch of vehicles can exist at the same time without feeling disproportionate to the infantry. Remember, right now 5 teammates in vehicles means 25% of your team. Map design then gets insane and caters to fantasy. Remember when I talked about verticality? I'm bringing real verticality. Remember that transmission tower on Scarif that Jyn Erso climbs in Rogue One? Well, it's in the game. You can imagine this tower being like the one in Siege of Shanghai Battlefield 4, elevators and all. I count on this tower to become the most contested bit of level geometry in the entire game. Players taking transport ships up to charge the command post, bodies raining down every time a thermal detonator meets a target, a drop shield in the elevator making for an unsettling standoff, and all while TIE fighters and X-Wings zoom past locked in a battle of their own. Far beneath the tower, an AT-AT makes slow approach of a rebel command post and a dozen stormtroopers have come together to escort it. The rebels anticipated the attack though and sneakily placed mines below the shallow waterline. Within a second, 3 troopers find their demise, and the rest of them freeze. It's at this moment when they start taking sniper fire from the tower and a rebel with a rocket launcher punches a hole in the head of the AT-AT amidst the chaos. Which is immediately followed up by a rebel X-Wing firing proton torpedoes into the weak spot, blowing the whole thing up. Which is itself immediately followed up by an Empire player hitting a once-in-a-lifetime EMP shot, stunning the X-Wing and sending it barreling into the tower. The exploding, burning carcass tumbles through the tower at Mach 10, taking a bunch of players with it. These types of maps will be glorious, every single one will be unique and cater to a unique battle fantasy. Some of them might be extremely asymmetrical, like Kashyyyk docks from the original Battlefront, which makes a return. One team spawns on solid land. One team spawns on an island at the opposite side of a shallow lake. The start of the match is this crazy push, 32 battle droids, tanks and walkers storming the beach with the clones defending. A map like Endor I'd make bigger than the other ones, allowing players to get lost, stimulating fights between smaller groups, allowing for stealth, the fantasy of guerrilla warfare and terrifying moments where you're up against an ATST all on your own. A hill with a command post on it makes for this cool vertical battle, a path that circles back on itself has a bunch of speeders racing down it, speeders that now allow for a passenger as well. Now the Star Wars universe hasn't stood still since 2017 of course, so there's also some opportunity for new locations. The Narkina 5 Imperial Prison Complex from the Endor show. One team at the bottom, one team at the top. There are level gimmicks like electrified floors and ways for players to open and close doors and operate machinery. It's Star Wars Operation Locker. Every map is unique, every map makes you want to play that one more match. My intention to have immersion as top priority again means getting rid of a lot of the UI as well. Currently there are just so many player icons all floating around. In my game only your squad mates have icons above their heads. Both enemies and allies only get their names shown when hovering over them. I also delete all seeing through walls abilities from the game because I want players to be able to hide or flank without getting cheaply caught. The radar only shows sign of enemies when they shoot, but you can temporarily mark enemies with a designated button like in Battlefield 4. Vehicles naturally act the way they should in Battlefront. They spawn on the map, you can enter them, you can exit them. If an enemy vehicle is empty, you can steal it, but only after performing a hacking minigame that takes some time to complete and emits a loud beep, making sure this is a risky thing to do and preventing it from happening all the time. Many vehicles allow for at least a second player to enter as a gunner, but there are also vehicles focused solely on armored transport now. The starfighters can also be entered and exited any time, though Star Wars has no answer to parachutes and fall damage makes a return, so you'll die in impact unless you have a jetpack. Next classes, they are back old Battlefront style and with them 2 weapon loadouts. Your secondary is usually a pistol of some kind, but the engineer gets a rocket launcher. As primary, infantry uses rifles, engineers burst and single shot rifles, pilots shotguns and recon snipers. Also now for the first time you can pick up weapons on the battlefield, further allowing for interesting sandbox design. For example, now throughout the maps unique power weapons can be found, not part of any starter class. Sticky grenades, a one-time use rocket launcher, and that EMP weapon I talked about earlier, which is exactly like the plasma pistol from Halo. Charge it up and any vehicle can be stunned for a limited amount of time. All vehicles have weak spots that can be targeted now, but also swiftly repaired by pilots. This game is supposed to be balanced from a unit position, so it can become unbalanced and creative through sandbox instead. Which brings me back to special units and soldier variants. Instead of hiding them behind points or limiting the amount that can be active at the same time, I'll simply try to balance them. The Jet Trooper can sprint and just has a short range SMG as main weapon. This is a serious trade-off, but in my opinion the special classes need serious trade-offs. Trade-offs so serious you'll only want to use them for a specific purpose. Infiltrating with a jetpack, defending point with a droideka. These classes are about excelling in particular situations and providing support for your team. They should never be your main thing to run with. Now onto something I haven't even talked about yet, gunplay. I want gunplay to have depth. This is kinda hard because how we give gunplay depth usually is with things like bullet drop and recoil. They don't particularly make sense for weightless lasers, but who cares if it makes sense or is 100% lore accurate, you need to take liberties for the sake of gameplay. Recoil will be a thing to manage on all weapons, bullet drop will maybe exist for some snipers, but not all. The main way I want to keep things a bit more interesting is projectile travel time. I want projectiles to be slow enough on some weapons that you can start evading fire at longer ranges. This is a property we can adjust and make unique to individual weapons. Some have really fast lasers that hit near instantly, some have much slower ones that you want to stay close range for. Skilled players will eventually gain muscle memory for compensating travel time, allowing them to pick fights at longer ranges. Now zooming out to the grand scale again, to turn Battlefront even more into a playground with infinite content, this game will have a basic version of Halo's Forge. Make your own maps, choose your own vehicle and weapon spawns, play with modifiers and choose the classes player are able to play as. You can now pit the clones against the Empire or make Ewok hide and seek with a single Darth Vader hunting them down. Along with the custom games browser, the standard Battlefield server browser also makes a return, allowing you to easily grasp which games are active and choose which map to join. I want this game to be the social hotspot it's meant to be. That also means push to talk on console. Even when you're in a party, you'll be able to talk to teammates with the combined proximity chat push to talk. For the droids, stormtroopers and clones, the game even automatically applies a voice changer, making for hilarious moments and a genuine sense of camaraderie between players. But I can get much crazier. You remember how in Battlefield 1 DICE created the tech for this behemoth zeppelin to enter the map and crash dynamically? Well, imagine you're in the heat of battle on Endor and you suddenly hear this over comms. Imperial Star Destroyer entering atmosphere. Prepare the fighters. An actual Star Destroyer will dynamically fly in and rain down bombardment from above. 2 aerial bombardment turrets can be accessed on board by Empire players, but the Star Destroyer's distance to the battlefield makes it basically impossible to see targets on the ground. This is where another bit of team play comes in. Squad leaders on the ground using the mark function can now mark territory and enemies for the players in the Star Destroyer to bomb. On the rebel side, you get warned of imminent bombardment through a beacon lighting up the center of the incoming strike, and a voice line overcomes if you find yourself near the area. Creating these insanely tense and cinematic moments where you desperately sprint away from your current position with full knowledge a solid mass of fire and death is on its way. The game becomes a bit like Helldivers. You dive to the ground and a cluster of explosions decimates the area you were just standing on. What's next? Well, to take out the Star Destroyer, you must take out the Star Destroyer. Fighters take to the skies to dogfight and destroy critical infrastructure of the ship. Rebel transports take up to 8 players on board and fly into the hangar with fighters escorting them. Like the old Battlefront 2, a landed transport ship acts as a spawn point for the entire team. A vulnerable one. So as infantry spawns and pushes forward, some players tactically take the pilot class and stay behind to protect and repair the transport. It's the game design portion of this whole scenario that does leave some things to be figured out, like will the conquest match on the ground continue, in which case team coordination becomes really important? Will Empire players be able to respawn inside the Star Destroyer, because that would make it really hard for the rebels to push through and get to the critical parts to destroy? Ideally, this whole thing is balanced so the rebels always make progress. A good team makes fast progress, a bad team slow progress, but eventually the Star Destroyer does have to meet its demise. Oh, and I'm using the Star Destroyer as an example, but of course a rebel capital ship could spawn as well, and on some other map the same thing might be done for the Clone Wars. Now, when critical damage is done to the capital ship, it doesn't explode, it crashes onto the map in cinematic fashion. And slowly enough that the players on board get a chance to escape. Fire breaks out, the entire level geometry starts tilting, physics objects start sliding. The player piloting the rebel transport inside the hangar waits for as long as possible and narrowly makes it out when the fire spreads to the hangar itself. Half the crew didn't make it. When the Star Destroyer finally crashes onto the ground, the entire level transforms visually, like collapse of the Siege of Shanghai skyscraper that I used as an example earlier. I just brought back Battlefield 4 style Levolution. After the Star Destroyer's crash, smoke and dust lowers visibility, and an expanding forest fire pushes players together for one last chaotic standoff. What's crazy is, I feel like I'm describing a game that DICE was on the path of making. Battlefield 4, released in 2013, it did have a fantastic sandbox, destructible environments, vehicles spawning on the map, it did have a collapsing skyscraper, and it released on PlayStation 3. But then, through Battlefield 1, 5 and 2042, DICE would slowly end up removing innovative elements found in 4, simplifying the game in the process, making it too more of a hero shooter. Turning it maybe in their eyes more casual, broad audience friendly, but really making the games less fun for everyone. A collapsing skyscraper could be done on PlayStation 3, but destructible walls is now too much to ask for on PlayStation 5. Am I allowed to look at all of this and just kind of go, what happened? This whole video I've been relentlessly shaming DICE for being less ambitious than Pandemic in 2004, but honestly, DICE was equally ambitious just 10 years ago. This video shouldn't have to exist, the ideas I'm proposing would be obvious next steps in 2013. So something happened and I don't know exactly what. But I have a hunch. It probably has something to do with money. My best guess is that at these large companies, creative control over projects has slowly bled from artists to businessmen, and Battlefront simply marked the turning point. Video games no longer take form from inspired vision, but from focus tested and sales data driven hard science. Focus tests tell us kids like Call of Duty, so let's make a game more like that. Sales metrics tell us live service games are most profitable, so let's pivot to that. It's like creative ideas face a wall of corporate scrutiny and only make it into games now with all the edges smoothed off. Games look amazing now, but are toothless from a vision standpoint. It's infuriating. EA's Battlefront games sold a combined 25 million copies. That's a mind-boggling amount for 2 games that ended up having exactly 0 impact on gaming culture and lost all those players in a month. And this is maybe the wildest thing to me. By purposefully not making Battlefront resemble the old games that were popular for a reason, by purposefully not using their own Battlefield 4 as the template for what players clearly want, by purposefully not making an awesome game first and monetizing later, EA left money on the table. Massive amounts of money. Battlefront can 100% be up there with the most popular shooters. Would it have dethroned Call of Duty? Well, probably not, but could it have taken second place? I think so. The internet would have flooded with clips of crazy moments, each one funnier, more ridiculous and cooler than the last. Of the same 14 million players who would buy that first Battlefront, 99% wouldn't stop playing after a month of boredom. They'd come back month after month, so irresistible would it be to live the battle together with your friends. Even now, the money is right there for the taking, but EA just refuses to take it. Battlefront 3 is confirmed not to be in development. So here we are again, just like I was in the early 2010s, without hope. Will this franchise ever make a return? Perhaps, but companies have become risk-averse, extremely risk-averse. So risk-averse that they've essentially gone schizophrenic and are making completely nonsensical choices, ironically ensuring the downfall they're trying to avoid. Yes, Battlefront 2015 sold 14 million copies, but the Star Wars name alone is no longer the golden ticket to infinite profit it used to be. A couple weeks ago, a colleague of mine obtained a free Star Wars Outlaws code and asked the team who wanted it. No one even replied. It took probably a week or two for this person to find someone to reluctantly take the free game. A AAA, open world, bounty hunter Star Wars game. Players would have killed for that game in 2012, but in 2024 it underperformed significantly and no one cares. Star Wars is dying and the possibility of a new Battlefront with it. The only thing we can do is what gamers have always done. Keep passionately talking about what we want and what we don't want. Don't give in to the defeatist attitude that this is how things are now. We can inspire change. We hold the power, and the backlash to Battlefront 2's loot boxes proved both. Laws were changed, politicians mobilized, gaming was saved. Now imagine if we were always passionate about good game design as loot boxes. I can dream. It's 5:54 PM. The Battle of Endor is in full swing and me and my friend are at the center of it. The outside world has disappeared, there's only the game. The pressure of wanting to end this day victorious is immense. This match feels like the culmination of everything. It's all too perfect. We have to play well. And we do. The pressure, the emotion, the adrenaline, everything combines, fall into place and we enter a flow state. Our communication is crisp and to the point. Our tactics we execute flawlessly. We capture a command post here, work together to destroy an ATST there. It all happens in what feels like one long blur. Before we know it, it's 6:30 PM. We're outside, sitting at one table of many in a chain spanning the entire street. Every household has contributed meals to the all-you-can-eat buffet. As me and my friends sit there in the shade with a full plate and soon to be full stomach, in the most ridiculously idyllic scenario you can imagine, all the talk of the table is the activities of the day. We haven't forgotten, it was a fantastic day. But what remains unspoken is that we both know we experienced something that turned this fantastic day into a legendary day. From a day to remember into a day to cherish and celebrate forever. The victory of a lifetime. As we sit there and feast, our minds go out one more time to that forest moon in a galaxy far, far away. We know we'll be back. We know it'll never be the same. Thank you for watching. I'll see you around.